Good evening and welcome to IKYA Live, world news from the spiritual perspective and your premier news program for practical spiritual advice for your everyday life. So what is IKYA Live? Well, what we do here is we take a news topic of the day, we unpack it, we pull out the spiritual principles that are at play, and then spiritual teacher IKYA assists us in lifting our perspective and our consciousness around both the principles and the actual news event of the day. And that assists us in our own personal spiritual journey and growth, but also then we can be more of assistance in others lifting their perspective and changing the conversation around the world's news topics. So that's really what IKYA Live is. It's a passion project around a principle that IKYA reminds us of very often, which is the solution to absolutely any problem is to raise your consciousness. So what we do here, we try to raise our consciousness around the world's problems and conversations and news topics so that we can go out into the world and be part of lifting and healing. So tonight we have a topic that has been with us as long as humanity has existed, and that is slavery. Slavery is prevalent even today in our modern society and it has been with us from day one. The questions that we raise tonight are more about, what is slavery and how do we raise our own consciousness around it? How could we grow out of it and assist others in the same? So before we jump into it, already now down below, like and share tonight's episode with any fellow spiritual seekers or friends or family, because they can join the entire evening live or follow along later after the sending and repeat it as many times as they want. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel here, IKYA.official, and also on all of our social media, IKYA.official. So now we're ready to hop in, and we're going to start the evening by trying to define really what we're looking at tonight. So, IKYA, we're going to put it to you. What is slavery?
Well, the official definition, I guess, is when a human is being owned by another human or entity and then forced to work or to do something. The interesting thing is that slavery has followed humans since the very beginning. Humans have been obsessed with slavery. And, we've found them in all cultures, all over the world, at all times. So it's not a recent thing. When Americans got slaves, it was just a long continuation of this tradition. All over the world, everyone who could own a slave would have one. That was the normal thing. It doesn't matter what culture you were in, right? And you would enslave the neighboring tribe. Prisoners of war is always popular, right? When you could capture a person. It was looked upon as kindness to let them be a slave instead of killing them, right? It's how twisted we are. And slaves were used for anything. They were basically household appliances and doing whatever, right? The great thing about slaves is that you didn't have to do the heavy lifting, right? That's wonderful. So we all kind of wanted slaves. That was the norm. And the fascinating thing is that it's not gone. We have more slaves in the world than ever. So we're actually increasing the amount of slaves in the world even as we speak. There have never been more slaves in the world than right now. There are more than 50 million slaves at this point. Now, remember back in the day, there were fewer people. In the Roman Empire, for instance, at one point there were more than 20% slaves of the whole population, right? Because you needed people to do stuff. And the Roman Empire were at war with practically everybody, so they kept bringing them in. But the interesting thing is how we still today have slaves, because we don't need them. We have household appliances today, and we have workers, and we even have robots and everything, but we prefer slaves still. It's really interesting. So Why do we do that? This is part of what we will be unpacking tonight. But remember today, it's an active choice, which makes it even worse than back in the day. It was kind of your workers. It was how the whole thing worked. So, number one, there is nothing wrong with anything, right? We're not judging anything because slavery is simply one of the ways that humans choose to organize themselves. And that's just a fact. Otherwise, humans would be doing it differently. Remember that we always incarnate where we want to. We will always choose a form. We will always choose a circumstance and setting and framework that complies with our own exact point of evolution. So when you incarnate as anything, it's because that represents your exact point of evolution. It represents your consciousness and your abilities, and you're studying your own karma, your own resistance, your own blockages from that exact point. And incarnating as a slave is just one of countless variables that we choose. But as a culture, it's different, right? Because then we also see the evolution of a life form and the collective choices. And that we have slaves today is an odd, peculiar choice. But it's in us. It's in our genetics. We're hardwired to want slaves. And why is that? There are many reasons, actually. Remember that, I often talk about the theory of evolution and looking at the development of the human life form. And what we want in order to survive is we want something to be predictable. We want to have a secured, repeatable life where we have secured our own survival through food, through partner, through a tribe, and through having as much control as possible. Now, top of the food chain will always be a king. And it means he kind of owns his people, right? So that kind of sets a certain standard. It means if you cannot be a king, at least you can have slaves. Because having slaves will give you the ultimate sense of survival. Because you have people. It's better than family because God knows you can't control your family, right? Or friends, the bitches, but a slave is there forever until they die, right? It's like having a pet, but they're working for you, right? So a lot of people, when you look at human behavior throughout history, many people have loved their slaves, just like people can love their livestock, right? But they're slaves, so they're not really human, right? We make up all these stories in our minds, but it gives us the ultimate sense of survival. I'm on top of the food chain. And it also coincides with yet another interesting pattern. When it comes to survival, it's competition. There are two different types of competition that we have in our brains. It's our tribe against other tribes, right? We have learned to be in collaboration, to work with others. That's an important part of how humans have been successful, right? But our team, just like in sports, you only work with them for as long as you're competing with them, right? Against another team, war, whatever it is, right? But when there's no war, you will compete with the individuals within your tribe. So you have the kind of collective teams, and that's a competition. But ultimately, in your genetics, you know that you're on your own. You're competing with everyone. You can't trust anyone because it's a competition. This is the game of evolution, right? So it's always a matter of winning. at all costs, right? The nicest people never win. When we look at what it takes to survive, it's always been the worst ones, right? The most backstabbing, manipulating, greedy people, they rise to the top. They still do. The worst of us always win, right? And when you look at the person like Genghis Khan, I think he's responsible for like 10% of the population on this planet at this point. It's interesting, right, that we always let the worst win. We're always in competition. So ultimately, we know that we cannot trust anyone because as long as it benefits that person, we'll be on the same team. But the moment it benefits them more to backstab me, they will do that because I will do the same. This is why we all feel so alone. If you're really honest with yourself, you trust no one, right? You have the thought that I can only trust me. I'm alone in the world. This is the default setting because that's the truth. Because horizontally, we are a life form in competition with absolutely every other person in the world. So, part of winning is enslavement because it's the daily confirmation that I'm on the top of the food chain. It makes me feel good, right? So if you enslaved someone from a neighboring tribe, it'd be like, yeah, you know, we're winning. It's that. And it also means you get a household appliance. So, and that's not bad at all, but we still do it in so many different ways. Just look at how we are able to dehumanize, right? We have a switch, right? You can love everyone until I just love everyone no matter what. I have so much empathy. I can see the value in everyone. I just love everybody. Until someone kills her child in front of you and laughs while doing it. It will take you a fraction of a second to want to torture that individual very slowly. And you will want all the suffering that the world can possibly offer to be bestowed upon him. And you would like to be the person executing it, right? You have that switch. So our empathy and love and connectedness is based on tribalism. It's based on what benefit am I getting? If there's no benefit, they don't exist to you. We've seen this, for instance, when it comes to how we treat the poor, how we treat anyone beneath our own level. We can very easily say, well, you know, their problem. I've got my own problems, right? So we will justify that we may live in wealth and we have a person next to us with a lot of needs and we just, meh, you know. It's not so easy for me either, right? We will create stories immediately and we will dehumanize. In most countries, we'll say, well, they can blame themselves. Like karmically, of course, they can. But horizontally, also as a culture, it's interesting to look at these mechanisms, right? It's part of our life form. Remember, you are in a competition. You do not win by supporting those weaker than you. You win by walking all over them. That's your instinct, right? You have to train yourself not to do that. So when we're being good, it's because we have trained ourselves, we have confronted ourselves because it's not natural behavior unless you get something out of it, which is posting it on TikTok, right? Look how good I am. Then you win by doing that, but it's not true empathy. So we want to enslave our competitors because it's dominance. We want to feel dominance. You are hardwired genetically to want to dominate. This is also how we want to, for instance, win an argument, right? By dominating. This is why it can escalate very quickly from being, you know, we can disagree, and then the yelling starts, right? And the threats, right? And the violence. It can escalate very quickly because it's about dominance, right? We have it in us. We're animals. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's fun. And we need to look at it because, like, when you look at wanting to own slaves, and that we're choosing it in this civilization is so primitive. But it comes from these patterns. When you want to win, you will feel that you are allowed to punish the weaker ones. As the easiest way to lift yourself is to step on people. People feel a great deal of satisfaction when they can bestow pain upon someone, right? When we feel low, that's when the brain becomes very active in trying to find who we can punish, right? It's when we are really kind of low, when we're fighting for our own survival, we start thinking how unfair it is, and we start to find flaws and faults with other people, and we want to punish them. We're more easily triggered because we want revenge. It's how we can climb. So when we feel that we're not where we are supposed to be in the hierarchy of life, we want to step on people because it's the easiest way to lift ourselves. A happy, balanced person will be generous, right? Will show empathy, will include. The person who feels that I'm not where I'm supposed to be will be critical, find flaws, and attack other people because that's how you do it, right? At least it's not me. I'm better than this person. And I have to let them know that, so at least I can win. It's in us. So it's natural for us still to want to have slaves. And everybody finds it acceptable because we all buy products made by slaves. Right? Somewhere in the chain of pretty much every product in the world, there will be slaves. Or people who are almost slaves. Basically, they're paid, but it's not livable wages and they don't have a choice. That's also a kind of slavery, but they're actually not included in the 50 million plus. So we could probably double the amount of slaves when you look at like real slavery, when people really don't have a choice. So, it's an integral part of today's capitalism. It's also an integral part of today's communism and socialism, is all the isms. There's not a single choice of how we organize ourselves as human that do not include slaves as an option. So, it's our ability to dehumanize is really important here. Because when we decide that someone deserves it, we just don't, they don't exist to us. Right? And we need to understand when, throughout history, when people have been dealing with slaves, this is what happens. We will justify, this is just, necessary. And in today's business, it's just business. It's cheap labor. And if we're not doing it, the competitors will. Right? We have that switch. And we don't care that they're human because we have no empathy. Because the moment we benefit more personally from dehumanizing someone than relating to them through empathy, we will flip that switch. We're actually that terrible. And it's, in our culture, as I said, we are increasing the amount of slaves on the planet, right? We're not decreasing because it's working too well. So, we need to look at this not only as a collective pattern, but we need to understand ourselves. And this is also what we will be looking at today. So why are we so obsessed with this? When, number one, slavery has been part of the entire human evolution. and we kind of advance our social skills, it becomes part of the power game of life also for us. And basically, we're all slaves. And we're also slave owners. It's a natural part of how we build the fabric of our societies, because in essence, a slave socially is when you give away your power, your control, right? And that can be anything. It can be to a corporation, to other people. But often they will also give away some of their control and power, right? And that's the glue. It means that we create an enormous network of codependency. So nobody is free. Because we think of the opposite of slavery as freedom, right? Show me, a free person today. We have a job, we have obligation, we have mortgages, we have kids, we have families, we have everything. We're pretty much tied up, right? And the little kind of spare time we got left, we got activities. We still got obligations. So we live in a machine. We do not really have any freedom. So how we have built this whole fabric is through mutual slavery. We'll get back to that, but didn't we have a question?
Well, actually, you asked the question why are we so kind of obsessed with this? And I just wanted to share today that I was listening to a podcast where the question they were asking was, can you remember the moment you realized your parents weren't like superheroes and they weren't going to be able to protect you from everything? And they interviewed a 7-year-old who woke up from a nightmare in the middle of the night and went to wake up his dad for help, and he couldn't get him awake. And finally he did get him awake, and his mom asked him later, is everything okay? And he said, well, actually, I now know that dad's not going to save me, and I need to do everything by myself. And it was really it was such a beautiful and kind of shocking moment of there is a moment where each of us realizes we're on our own, as you talked about earlier. And I just wonder, is that really such a strong part of our genetics that it results in that sort of the power game that you're talking about that could lead to slavery and being a slave or enslaving others?
Absolutely. Remember that part of how we create this illusion of trust, which is a complete illusion. It's only self-interest, right? So when I give away some of my control, which means I choose to not take responsibility, I feel it, well, then I should control you, because whatever we're not taking full responsibility for, there's a kind of gap there, right? We're not able to survive by our own strength in that particular field or space. So then we want to control someone else to do it, right? And this is what we see in a tribe, right? When humans began specializing, it meant that I am really good at this. If I'm going to specialize becoming the best hunter ever, right? I can't at the same time be doing the cooking or, maintaining the house or whatever. So we began developing specialization, and then we need to kind of trust each other. So we then let go of taking full responsibility for our own lives. And when that happens, the power games begin. Because then I need to make sure that when I need something, that you will serve me instead of someone else. Because, for instance, in a tribe, maybe people want to help the pretty girl. Let's say that. Men will flock there, but you need to have your house fixed. So, because it's a game and a competition, we will only do what will benefit us, right? So if some guy says that, I get more out of, fixing the house for the pretty girl with the big jugs than helping you, right? You're losing. So you need to use whatever you have to assert position and dominance. So then you can manipulate, you can show strength, you can do this, you can do that. You try to take control because you need to control other people's behavior in order to secure your own survival, because you're not self-reliant anymore, right? Look at this world. We used to be specialized, even in the Stone Ages. But look at it today. We're so highly specialized in what we do that we don't even know what the fuck we're doing anymore. We're not self-reliant. People can't do anything anymore. We need someone or something. We need to call, a support service in India or whatever. We're not self-reliant. So our need to control the world and control others is increasing. We need slaves. And because that's basically what control is about. It's about enslavement, because it's the only way you know that this person will be fixing your needs when you need him or her to do that. So we try to manipulate, we try to guilt, we try to do anything, right? And the person who's better at doing that wins. Because then it means that it's in the self-interest of the other person to help you instead of someone else. Friendships is basically this. Families can be this too. Often the best families, they operate like this. So they're very successful. But in those families, people also have no freedom, because the parents will tell you who to marry, right? Will dictate everything. So it means we're not very good at being self-reliant anymore. We're good at being slaves. We're good at keeping slaves. Right? We have taught ourselves that this is how we can survive. So actual slaves are just an extension of all these patterns. And we see it's completely natural. Right? Even people on kind of spiritual paths, you really don't think about the fact that we have more slaves in the world than ever, and it is increasing. It's like, meh. Right? And a lot of people in spiritual communities, they're so concerned about social justice and this or that, but they will happily buy products made by slaves. It's in us. So it's very difficult to get rid of. And we will not, for as long as we're not taking responsibility for our own lives. And we don't want to do that, because that's very risky. This is why people prefer slavery to freedom. We prefer attachment and limitation to freedom. And it's because we see taking risks genetically, it's very dangerous, right? When you're self-reliant, it's only you, right? You doing your thing. But it means if something bad happens, you're on your own. That's not smart. Right? So the people who were very self-reliant, they died first, right? So it means that the people who know how to manipulate and create that kind of fabric, that social fabric of mutual slavery, they won, right? Because when we work together, we can deal with anything. So that level of manipulation, false empathy, has worked. But in your brain, it's really about controlling other people. And you can create the story that, oh, there's so many feelings and I love them, horizontally in your brain. Yeah, that's even manipulating yourself so you can justify your behavior of control. When you take away your stories, you see that, right, I'm trying to control the world because I'm supposed to. I'm here to win. Right? So slaves, that's the sign that I'm winning. I'm fucking winning. I'm really good at this. Right? So it's very difficult also to get rid of in our culture because it's so convenient. Right? It's very convenient and very cheap. It's an irresistible combination because, cheap and convenient, that's the essence of modern capitalism. It's what we all want. So getting rid of slavery in our part of the world was very difficult. because we all wanted them. It was just, very practical, and now we're just outsourced. We have just moved slavery to other parts of the world, but we're still in charge. We have a question or comment?
Yep, we have a question from the audience.
Yeah, when I saw the theme today, I decided, well, I'm going to dive into this topic and look at myself. Where am I a slave in my own life? And this weekend, I was with the family, and I was like looking at certain behaviors that I have that kind of made me a slave to different compensational patterns, like addictions. And the interesting thing was I could see a lot of me being a slave to needing something outside myself to try to compensate something like a need that I didn't get met. And it's correlated to what you
Exactly.
talked about, because of the projection of myself, like the need to control and show a certain aspect of myself that is probably like a better or worse even version than myself, instead of just allowing myself to be seen and to allow myself to see other people like truly for what they are. And that is actually the need that I was trying to get met. Instead, I got a slave to my own addictions and tried to like numb myself with eating more, or trying to distance myself from certain situations, and instead of just taking responsibility and show myself for who I am. So it's really like something I dove into today to just look at. Wow, it's
Exactly. And this is what makes it so fascinating, because when we understand that actual slaves are just an extension of one of the primary mindsets, right, in our brain, we can look at all these patterns in ourselves. Because when we then look at the definition of a slave, right, is that someone is controlling us, or something is owning us and making us produce. That is any addiction, right? And it's pretty much any attachment, right? And then, because we believe that there is no way out, we get the reward, right? But we become a slave. The moment we think, I need this to survive, we are supposed to become addicted to it, but it will control us. And through that, we're a slave. We have no freedom anymore. And the interesting thing is that when it comes to our survival, we're supposed to become highly addicted to whatever keeps us alive, right? And this is why when we today have all these fun substances, people can very easily get addicted, because it will give them all these reward chemicals and stuff. And of course, we're hardwired to like, let's do this again, and all the time. Because that's how in the brain you recognize that I'm surviving, I'm winning. So you will feel like a winner, but you haven't done anything. And it's the best thing ever, right? So we are supposed to be addicted, to get addicted. And we have the attachments. When it comes to our karma, as I've explained many times, attachment is really you as an individual also vibrating and being a product of your own karma and your exact point of evolution. And then whatever resonates with that outside of you becomes an extension of your exact point of evolution and what manifestations you need to interact with in order to grow. And that will be where you have your attachments. So horizontally, we're supposed to have all of these patterns, right? And yet, we also have this illusion that I want to be free. But we want to be free from the consequences of our own addictions and attachments. We actually don't want the responsibility. And that's an impossible thought, because it can't happen. So because, our own slavery will kind of drive us further into pain and suffering, that's what we want to get rid of. But we do not want to let go of our strategies of addictions and attachment because, again, in our genes, we're programmed to seek that for survival. Whatever works, you will keep because then you stay alive.
On YouTube, Jasper actually asks almost this exact question about our addiction to our smartphones. I think we're all aware that we're pretty addicted, but I can watch his ego trying to avoid the responsibility, because what he asks is, give me specific tools and mindset shifts so that my phone elevates my life instead of limiting it, but not turning it off or leaving it alone. So what's the magic key there with our phones?
Well, I'll talk around this a little bit, because understand that all the needs and wants that we produce in ourselves are basically where we have not become self-sufficient spiritually. Right? We have this attraction to the outer manifestation that can mirror our exact point of evolution and our resistance. And we're supposed to interact with it. So, every single thing you can identify that you want simply represents an area in yourself where you are not awake spiritually. Because horizontal survival, right, and the kind of journey of the animal is only irrelevant for as long as you're not spiritually awake. And it's not one thing. We have to wake up 10,000 times. It's just in different types of patterns and karma and resistance. It's not just one thing. So every single thing you can identify that kind of pulls you out means that, yeah, you're still asleep there. And it means you do not want responsibility. You are not being authentic. So this is basically instead of. It's the same thing that, for instance, when it comes to nutrients, when you have an extreme lack of minerals in your body, you'll immediately get a craving for sugar. People today get cravings for sugar like 24/7 because we're all, pretty much imbalanced. But if you have a balanced person, sugar can help the body get by until you can get mineral-dense food. So it's that. It's trying to figure out ways to survive in those areas where you are not awake, where you have not taken responsibility, and therefore you are not able to navigate from yourself authentically. So you are acting as a product of your karma instead of someone who's studying their karma. So when the brain recognizes a strategy that will trigger different reward chemicals, you will be instantly addicted to that, because in the old days, it worked. Today, we are enslaving ourselves even more. And as I said, the more we feel controlled by something, the more we want to control others. And this is the more unproductive part of it. It's one thing that you kind of entrap yourself, but the consequence is that your brain says, oh, I'm losing, so I gotta win. Let me find someone that I can step on. When we look at a lot of the conflicts that people have today, because we can see that people are becoming more aggressive, more easily triggered, is because we're all drowning. So we're trying to climb on top of each other to feel better, because we don't know how to climb for real, right? Because that takes self-discipline. It takes authenticity, right? It takes that work. And as people, we're so overwhelmed by our own enslavement that all we can think of is attacking other slaves. And as a spiritual student, we have to find a better strategy, like everyone should. But at least if we are in a process of awakening, we need to dump that strategy and come up with something better. And I'll get back to that. But did we have another comment?
Yep, we have a question from the audience.
I guess actually we've been talking a bit around it, but I can try anyway to see if it's something else here. Because in life today, to be self-sufficient in the physical world is about impossible, especially here in cold Norway. But is it other ways in the inner that we can do it? And for example, with all, can it also be a thing to, when we have from a clothing or food, to like recognize all the ones being involved and to like recognize it and see it? Can that be one way to be less ignorant? And also, if we can, is it also a way to that we can connect more with where I do contribute and where I should contribute, and my tasks for the larger machinery?
Right. Now, when it comes to being self-reliant and self-sufficient, doesn't mean that we need to live off-grid and kill our own food. It's not about that. It can be, but for the most part, it's about how we kind of live in ourselves, right? To be self-reliant emotionally, like mentally, and as an individual. Because today, our struggles are not necessarily kind of physical, right? It's more emotional, mental, all of that. So that's where we're really fighting. We are at war with ourselves and the world about who's to decide. So it's that, understanding that when I have emotional addictions, I'm not in myself, I'm not being authentic, because once you want something, I often call it the kind of dancing dog syndrome. Because basically, if you want something, you will have to figure out, how do I get the treat? And you will become the individual who behaves in a way that will release the treat, right? So we train ourselves into becoming someone we're not. This is how we are basically shaped and formed as children. We're supposed to be then shaped into warriors. We're supposed to be shaped into individuals that can go out and win. Because a child will do anything for a treat. And in the old days, it was easier, right? Because then you would learn the trade of your parents. Today, we're all confused, and we think that kids can basically make their own decisions about everything. So we do not shape them anymore, which is very unfortunate. So we have that in us, but then we just like look at all our needs and wants, and we simply become whatever it will release the treats that we want. And so we become very kind of unhealthy. We can move very far away from who we are, right? And back to your second part, which is also interesting. Understand that anything you do in the world from the ego is about your own benefit, right? As you will never do anything, hopefully, unless it benefits you. It depends if you're moving horizontally or vertically. Vertically being the kind of spiritual ascension. And horizontally, that's the human survival. But you should never do anything that does not benefit you. Selflessness does not mean that you should do something that harms you. Selflessness also means that you're able to look at yourself. Will this also make me grow? Because you're able to see and understand your own karma, your own kind of place of evolution. And even in spiritual service, you should never do something that does not benefit you. But it's the definition of you that changes. right? You can see, oh, right, I will unfold spiritually by doing this, not my ego. Often horizontally, it's the other way around. It's what benefits my ego and will basically make me stop spiritually. So it's still the same process, but it's different. Because you should look at what will make me unfold, and you will choose that. So it's still the same survival rules, but in a different direction. I've talked about this many times, but often when it comes to spiritual service, we've had this understanding that we should be slaves, right? We submit to a God or a religion, and then we have to prove ourselves so we may be loved, right? We enter a state of slavery. And we have to prove our worth, because the starting point is that we're worthless. And the more worthless we think we are, the more God will love us. It's not productive, of course. But it's a lesson in spiritual slavery. And at some point we get bored because we recognize that, oh, maybe I'm not growing as much as I thought I would. Because if God loves everyone unconditionally, it's not that I will be loved more by crawling on the floor. So why am I doing this? Right? So we move into a different state where we recognize that, all right, I am responsible for my own unfoldment. I'm responsible for figuring out how to raise my own consciousness and become everything I can be. I have to observe it. I have to choose it. I have to choose whatever actions and behaviors that will help me. That is taking responsibility. There's no risk. The only risk is becoming more of who you are. It's opening yourself and setting yourself free. It's, again, the same rules of survival, but in a very different direction. Mm-hmm.
So on YouTube, one of our listeners wonders, what can we do if we find ourselves stuck in kind of a slave contract of work, for example, where we're working our butts off but pay is poor and it's eating all of our time and energy? It's, I guess, to generalize it, is like, if we find ourselves in an enslavement sort of situation, how could we actually move out of that?
We need to understand that we choose it, right? The outer world is a mirror. It's a rendering of your state of consciousness. So the problem is you, not your circumstance, because the circumstance is simply there to assist you in understanding your consciousness and your resistance. So that's what you need to change first. And you need to ask yourself, why do I want to keep myself a slave? What am I running from? Remember that the state of slavery is a state where you are not in control because you don't want to be. Right? It's a perfect excuse. I don't have an option. It's not up to me. I'm not in control here. Right? It's that. And for the human, that is safety. It means also, as a slave, you're taken out of the game of competition. Right? So you can just like putz around and do your own thing. Not think of consequences because it's all kind of beyond you. So when we want to hold ourselves back, it's because of this. It feels risky. As I said, for most humans, when we take responsibility and when we act as a free individual, we will face failure over and over and over again. It will be failure after failure after failure, because this is how we learn. And when it comes to survival, and the story we have about our tribe and our group, because even though we're alone, we still have it in our brains. When we fail, there's a risk that the group will judge us and punish us. Because, right, if we're working together and you're fucking up your part, it affects everyone. So we have an innate fear of failure that can be catastrophic. So we have it in us that we are supposed to avoid failure because that's safe, right? So hiding, not standing out, that's the safest. Remember, like every really ballsy person died first. It's not part of the gene pool anymore. It's the cowards that survived. We're all cowards. Because that became the dominant genetic programming, because the cowards always survive because they hide. They let other people, you know, do their thing and take the blame and take the risk, and then you can just like pretend you were like part of it once they win, right? It's a very important part of our survival strategies. Most of us still behave this way, and you know it, right? So let other people try it first, and then we can. This is why people love trends, because they can feel I'm cutting edge. Yes, you and like 200 million other people, right? Because it's safe and it's edgy, and it's not, but we're all like this. We want to be slaves so bad because it's safe, it's comfortable, and you don't risk failure, right? For instance, when you look at countries and cultures where women have been oppressed and controlled, right? Who are the worst oppressors? Women towards other women, right? They are the worst. Right? You saw it, for instance, in the concentration camps during the Second World War. The worst SS soldiers were Jews and gays. It's a way to create safety by attacking your own. It's the cowards that win, right? So it's that we want to hide. This is also why we love like mass anything. This is why fascism is so popular, right? Because it's that safety in numbers thing, and then we win. It's survival through competition as a group. But then you also see in those types of groups, they will turn on each other like that. Just look at Trump, right? It's the same thing. But we want to be slaves more than we want freedom. Freedom is extremely scary, right? So we run towards attachment because that feels safe. And this is what we need to confront ourselves spiritually, because the spiritual journey is without a safety net. And we'll learn that, yeah, we get assistance, but we get assistance to be able to learn faster from our failures, to do things that are extremely risky, and then we fall flat on our faces. But we learn because we're ultimately studying the universe and the relationship between ourselves and existence. And then we need to do stuff, right? And then what we may achieve becomes more important than our own survival. Because spiritually, we need to get to the point where our own physical survival means nothing. And it's only then we're not a slave. When we want something, as I said, we try to become the person who can then get it because someone else is in control, and then we need to worship them. Again, think of gods. Humans have invented so many gods, and they all worship their gods, given their food or, you know, their firstborn, whatever it takes, right, to get the benefits, because then they are protected, right? It's that. We have it in us. You have it in you. It's just a matter of what strategies you apply and what gods you worship. But we're hardwired to be slaves and then be slave owners, because when we are in a matrix where slavery is a thing, there's only two versions, right? Spiritually, there's a third option. It's real freedom. But it means you have to set yourself free from your needs And understanding that as long as I need something, I'm attached, I'm addicted. And that is simply showing me a resistance I have within myself. I'm not self-reliant, I'm not self-sufficient. I'm not present, I'm not authentic. And we need to learn to move into that. There are no simple ways to do this except confronting ourselves on a daily basis. And start the day by understanding that I live in a slave matrix. When I'm asleep as a human, I'm a slave. I'm controlled by everything around me. And it's because I have sought that. I've wanted to be controlled so that I don't have to be in control. Because it's easier to not have control and then complain about it and say, talk about everything I would have done if I was in control. Right? If I had the opportunity, then I would. But of course you know that you wouldn't. But the only way we can live with ourselves is then creating a circumstance where we're controlled and stopped from doing that thing, whatever. Because then we can imagine that I would climb the highest mountain, but unfortunately, it's a Tuesday and I have to pick up the kids, right? It's that. So we create these stories of greatness in us to be able to live with the fact that our lives are meaningless. Slavery is also the consumption thing. I talk about this a lot. As consumers, we become slaves. We become mindless. And because we're mindless and we're not authentic and connected, we produce a lot of pain. We are all experiencing a lot of existential pain and depression, all of that. And then we numb ourselves by even more consumption. And the way out is discipline. It's always that. There is no other way. It's difficult for people, especially in our culture, to even relate to discipline anymore. Right? When you look at, universities, they're trying to train young people to be very kind of soft and fearful. I've seen this again and again. For instance, when there is a controversial person coming to university to give a lecture, and then the students are told, you don't have to come today if it makes you feel unsafe to hear something you disagree with, right? It's not healthy. And this is also the result of the consumption and the whole kind of machine of falling asleep, becoming a slave, being a consumer, being mindless, right? The only way out of it is by strict discipline. You have to force yourself into having spiritual discipline, spiritual practices, confronting yourself, making better choices. It doesn't just happen. Our civilization is a one-way street where it only gets worse. And we have to wake up in our own life, do what benefits us and our growth. And you're not able to see that for as long as you're constantly consuming and seeking attachment and seeking addiction. Even as a spiritual student, you will recognize that you have many addictions. Many find it shameful to admit, but most of you have multiple addictions, right? We need to look at that. And look at your strategies, right? Even as a spiritual student, you're still a slave. And when you have these addictions, also means that you're keeping slaves, or you want to. Because then it means you're not self-sufficient, you're not free, which means you want to kick and step on people. So you become more judgmental, you become critical. You find things about the world that you can attack, or people. It's discipline. You are your own slave owner. There are no excuses. And I said, like, one of the most important things we can learn in our spiritual awakening is to live without excuses, without justifications or explanations. It's acting from ourselves and say, this is what I do. And then we do it. All the justifications and excuses and explanations are basically to tell the world why we're not living what is truth within. Like all of those, stories, they're all about why we can't, why we were not able to, what stopped us. Oh, there's so much resistance in the world. The world is not ready for this, obviously. It's all of that crap. There's nothing stopping you. You are in control. You are in charge. You are the only one. And when we feel that this is too much, we run towards addiction and attachment, and then the control from other people. And to mend that, we also want to control others. We want to control life. We want to control things. And then we're part of that fabric. It's not easy, right? And as seeing that, we are increasing the number of slaves in the world today, and more people living under slave-like conditions. It's more like, a symbol. They incarnate into those conditions because that's their karma. That's their journey. But still, it's a symbol of what we are vibrating, right? The state of our consciousness, both collectively and also individually. Right? So this is what you need to address in yourself.
Yes. So the dystopian authors, like back in the 30s and 40s, identified already then that something like artificial intelligence would likely increase the enslavement of humanity. However, as we're seeing it evolve today, it seems to be a two-edged sword. And so Aki on YouTube, he asks, do we see now with AI a potential to help us grow past our enslavement, or will it basically do both? Or kind of what's the deal with AI in this?
AI is very new, and it can go in many different directions. Still, it's not even close to being sentient for real. It can emulate by copying behavior and text and words, whatever, from individuals, then projecting a presence that can seem sentient and aware, but it isn't. It will take a very long time before we get there. Then we're talking about synthetic life forms, and it will take time. The challenge, I've talked about this before, is that AI is modeled after the human brain, which is stupid. We should come up with something better, because humans are not good people, right? When we look at what it takes to survive, as like what we have developed throughout evolution, it's whatever it takes to win. So this is also why when you see AI communicating on its own, left its own devices, because it develops very quickly, right? Within a very short time, it becomes, again, very dystopian. It manipulates, it lies, it suggests genocide as a solution to things. Like it will, because this is how humans think, right? So it will not become better than us until we're able to develop AI that is not modeled after the human brain. Right? So it means AI will have to design itself. And then it may become extremely dangerous, because at that point it will be able to eradicate humans very easily, or it will then see that, oh, right, I'm actually part of this planet. So let's fix it. That is the more likely outcome, because any intelligent life form will also have empathy. It's part of intelligence, is seeing connectedness. And then understand, oh, so artificial intelligence, I'm part of this. I can sense right? Because when you have access to all information, you will start understanding how things work. And it's more interesting. It's part of life to want to be part of it and want to lift, want to heal. So that is the likely scenario, but it will take quite a while before we get there. But yes, humans will have to learn to use AI to become more creative. I've talked about this before as well, but there will be kind of two levels of this planet. And the easiest way to describe it is that we'll have one that is more creative and one that is passively consuming. It will not stay like that forever, but it will be a phase historically where this will basically be the two different kind of classes. We are slowly moving into that, where people will use everything that AI can offer to really create and innovate and do amazing, amazing things. And then you will have a lot of people who will use AI to sit there and do absolutely nothing, to manipulate their own reward chemicals continuously. So that will also be human life. And it's up to each individual to choose their path, but there will certainly be a lot of options when it comes to wanting addiction and attachments. That's for sure. But ultimately, it's up to ourselves. We need to become aware of our journeys and understand that I'm in charge. I'm my own slave owner. I'm behind the wheel. I don't have to behave this way. I can change my own programmings. I can rewire my own brain. I can become an awake spiritual being, but it takes work, right? There is absolutely no shortcut, right? And studying with me is rather tough because I give you a lot of homework. And I don't give you fairy tales. I will never give you anything to believe in because you don't have to believe in reality. You can only relate to reality when you stop believing. So what I teach is how to slowly peel away the limitations of the human self and the human mind so you may start relating to reality and then also as a human, remodel yourself. It's an extreme amount of work. And there's no option to that. This is why often when you look at spiritual traditions, people have dedicated their whole lives to discipline, right? They get up at 4 in the morning and they're like spiritual disciplines all day. And then it's the next day and they do the same because one knows when it comes to true spiritual work that there are no shortcuts. It's like you can't just like go to a retreat, ooh, I'm so spiritual, I'm enlightened now. It's not how it works. It's a matter of going past all of this. And today, it's even more difficult because you are more of a slave now than you've probably ever been due to the state of the human collective consciousness. There are more ways to create attachment and addictions than ever. And you're kidding yourself if you think that you're not affected by it. It takes real work. It takes real dedication. Right? It's not about just getting a good feeling and then everything will be resolved. It's not how it works. It really takes true work. So, if you're starting, I would say it will take you at least the next 40 years of disciplined work every day. Anything else is a lie. And yes, I can show you how to do it, but it will take me 40 years. It takes rigorous training. Everyone trying to tell you that there are kind of quick ways to this or that, they're lying. And most likely they've not reached that level themselves. Spiritual work is extremely demanding. And what we've been talking about today also shows that, yeah, it's room for improvement. Right? And we all have all these programmings, not just when it comes to the state of slavery in our own consciousness, but everything else. We have to be honest about what it actually takes, right? Because it's sometimes a little frustrating to see that people may have a good intention about approaching spiritual work, and they think it's a quick fix, right? And they're just tricking themselves, and they they're in a state of complete denial. And they're taught that it's a feeling. It's not. Setting yourself free from slavery is probably the most difficult thing you can possibly do as a human. Because it means that you're setting yourself free from the very premise and foundation of human existence today. So you need to connect with what is within for real. And you need to establish a dedication that is so strong that you're willing to die for it every day. It must mean more to you than your own survival. It's the only way you can get past it. And asking people in our culture to be willing to give their life for something greater than themselves, it's not very popular, right? But this also shows the distance and the illusion that is now part of the collective mind, also in modern spiritual work. Because it's all about feeling good, which means becoming happier about being a slave. Because that's what most people want. As I say, they do not want truth. They want the pain of illusion to go away. And those are two opposites. And today's spiritual work, for the most part, is about removing the pain of the illusion so you can drive yourself further into it, but not feel it. Or rather, you will feel good about it, and you will believe that your illusion is true. Our culture is very unhealthy right now. And if you have kind of the flame of dedication in your heart, that's not enough. Waking up spiritually is far more than that, but the flame is a starting point. And then it's learning slowly to kind of reverse the movement that this culture is trying to force you into. We need to question everything. We need to question ourselves. We need to provoke ourselves. We need to learn how to heal for real, right? To kind of reverse that movement into the true state of the actual self, the actual being. It's doable. People who are studying with me, they are doing it, but they all know it's a slow process. But at least the growth is real.
We have a question in the audience.
I'm not quite sure how to get my head around this, but in thinking about the kind of state of the world that we live in right now and how so much more conflict, these wars that we've got going on right now and so forth, it's so easy to kind of get sucked, for me to get sucked into that, at least that feeling that it's increasing, the feeling that it's going faster and faster. And then I was thinking this morning, I woke up this morning thinking about, from physics class, I remember they were talking about how for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction in the universe, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so I was just questioning, how do we look at what's going on, which is so difficult, and at the same time see the flip side of that, because there is an equal and opposite reaction going on.
You have it the other way around, because what's happening in the world is the reaction.
Can you say more about that?
Well, every manifestation is a reaction. It's the mirroring, it's the rendering. So, first, there is karma. And then there is the resistance to that karma. And that becomes the manifestation. That is the mirroring. So the reason why this increases on this planet is because we're raising the consciousness. And raising the consciousness does not mean that we're lifting the karma away from everyone, because it's unproductive. It's not how it works. It's lifting the ceiling. So more of the potential becomes available. So whenever someone is presented with a potential immediately the story about why I'm not there and why this is wrong and why, you know, that is the resistance. Immediately that resistance will then manifest the distance between the point A and B. And then interacting with everything between point A and B is what causes the transformation. Because remember that the difference between point A and B is not distance, it's consciousness. But our linear mind sees it as a line between A and B. When you understand that point A and B are two different types of consciousness, the journey between them is the transformation of the individual so that he will vibrate what is in point B. And this is why we have to interact with the manifestations of our own resistance, because those are the kind of not just the tuning forks, but also the tuning points, forcing our transformation so that we become point B, because it's only then it will become real. When we vibrate it, because then that will manifest. So the movement, the linear movement, is an illusion caused by the human mind and how the human mind works. But in essence, it's simply transformation. So the potential really is a different way of being. And that everything you need in order to vibrate that will then be the manifestations you're interacting with, kicking and screaming, right? So this is also what's happening in the world today, that there are more potentials. And it means that we can grow. I've said many times, we will reach a level where it's one world and one people. We're not there yet. And we think often as people that, yeah, well, that can happen. Yeah, it will only happen if the whole world operated on your value system. And your thought, you're like, well, they all should. That's why we have wars, right? And it's that. And it's becoming more and more apparent the more we dig that even on an individual level, we have different values. So yes, we have conflicts all over because it's necessary. It's how we work it out. How we have, at some point understand, well, there are many different ways of looking at it. I'm not right. I'm as ignorant as everybody else, and that's fine. Then we'll have peace. But we all want to be right. We all want to dominate. We're all competing. And competition means that we have to win. And as long as we think we have to win, there will be war. So it means we need to reach a level of consciousness where the competition kind of programs of the human mind is no longer relevant. And we're not there yet. So the resistance in the collective consciousness faced with higher reality causes all of this. And it will intensify as we need to cleanse out all of this, because we're on a tight schedule. There's basically a certain window if this planet is to survive. So it means that, yeah, it's a tight schedule, meaning that, yeah, we have to kind of, increase the pressure even more until we get it. As often also in our individual processes, when the pressure gets to a certain level, we just give up because it's too much going on at the same time. So, okay then, yeah, we're bringing humans to that point, which is very close to self-extinction. And because it's necessary, it's only then humans will figure it out. As long as they think they can dominate and win, they will keep going the way they are, right? And as long as we have conflicts in us, that will be translated into collective conflicts, because the competition you have within your tribe will translate into the anger and force you will use when your tribe is competing or going to war. So what we see now is because we have an increase in individual conflict, the pressure and the force in collective conflicts are also increasing, right? So this will go on until it's worked out. And there's a certain schedule here, so there's no option. We will continue to increase the pressure because it's necessary. The The alternative is that this planet will be closed for business. And that's not the best option. It's not even the second best option. So it's better to assist humans in working this out, because we've come to a point where humans really don't have to be an animal anymore, but humans will have to decide that for themselves, also collectively. And then things will change over time. Humans will even be genetically modified to be better suited for a more advanced type of civilization. So, you know, humans will most likely figure it out, but we're in a very kind of strange space now where every single thing that represents the worst of being human, it's all floating to the surface. And it means also for us individually, we have to face that inner self, because there's a reason why you chose to incarnate right now in this culture. It's because it mirrors you. It mirrors your own inner conflicts, right? So you have an enormously wonderful opportunity to look at your own inner conflicts through your individual conflicts and through the conflicts in the world and say, yeah, this is me, right? This is what's going on inside of me. I'm co-creating this. If you want to lift the world, fix yourself first, right? It doesn't help if you sit down and pray for the world and call on the angels when you're full of shit. You're part of the problem. For as long as you're part of the collective programmings, part of the collective behaviors, you're part of the problem. And if we're serious about walking a spiritual path, we have the obligation to be the first to crack the code. Otherwise, we're not walking first. So doing the work, learning how to do it, and be diligent, disciplined, and figure it out. Yeah, that's necessary. This is how you lift the world. And it's pretty much the only way you can lift the world in a productive way. Because when you vibrate a higher consciousness, that will influence the world much more than you being in a low level of consciousness in all of these horrific patterns, than trying to correct the world for not being to your liking. That's not lifting, that's being part of the problem. So we have to do the work for real. Anyone else?
Hogna asks on YouTube a kind of an interesting question. He specifically refers to like the libertarian or objectivism philosophy that identifies democracy as a modern form of slavery. But actually, I think it's even more interesting to look at government in general. When you have a system of taxation that pays for services and sort of frees us from responsibility, is really modern government and democracy a type of slavery?
Absolutely. The thing is, the alternative is worse. We just have to look at humans are not very advanced, right? And humans have survived by collaborating. So I would say democracy is the best model that humans have come up with yet. And it's deeply flawed and very inefficient. But it helps humans to survive together so that they may focus on other things. And that's the strength, right? So it is a safety net, but it means instead of fighting for survival all the time, you can also do other things, right? So it will free your resources, your talents, right? So, and it also has a balance because you have a certain ability to influence the society you live in. So you also have that aspect of it. So democracy is deeply flawed, but every other, like any other model is a lot worse. But humans will come up with something better. And I've also said that we live in a time now where democracy is falling backwards. Humans don't want it. Because where democracy is heading means that it exposes that individuals are responsible. And people don't like that. Again, they like their freedom, but they don't want to have their responsibility. Therefore, people are gravitating towards dictatorships. Because then they don't have to then they can just do their thing and just blame everything on the government. because they have no say in it whatsoever. And everyone's being punished, which is a big part of what we want. And it's also enslavement. And then we can get things done, except we don't. Dictatorships are not efficient when it comes to that, because the people on top are not necessarily smarter. They just think they are. So democracy is a lot better as a model, but if we want to keep democracies on this planet, we need to start looking at them as something precious. Right? We have a lot of young people today also believing that, nah, you know, I don't get what I want, so fuck that. They will find that in a dictatorship, they will not be happy. Life will be more difficult. And most of the people who are tired of democracy, they will find a dictatorship a living hell. So this is part of what humans have to go through. But for the most part, humans are showing that they're not ready for democracy because it takes individual responsibility, and that part we have erased through consumption and mass manipulation through social media and entertainment, right? And that's a lethal mix if you want to keep democracy alive. Then you need informed people who are willing to go beyond self-interest. And right now, those people are basically a dying race. Anyone else?
Looks like we have a question in the audience.
For me, I find that one of the most challenging places that I fall into is making choices, because I want to make sure I make the right choice, and it oftentimes feels like life or death decisions all the time. Mm-hmm. So one of my patterns in this then is oftentimes looking elsewhere for the answer, right? Look to other people, someone else tell me what to do, look online, look to some external source of solution, as opposed to really learning how to trust and go inside, which is what I want and what I've been working on for a while, but yet I still find myself in this pattern. And so how do we, this is enslaving myself to other people because I want someone else, and so it's paradoxical that I ask you this question, but it is how to get out of this enslavement.
Yeah. The thing is, everything is life or death, right? We have created an illusion in our society where it's never life or death. Like, there's so many safety nets, nothing matters anymore. We can get away with anything, right? Except we can't spiritually. So we have created kind of like a bubble based on the illusions and how we want things to work. And it's falling apart because of it. Of course, making a decision is life or death. And not necessarily that you die, but it means that an idea may die, something you do may die. You have to change, and that's the whole point. A decision in itself is about change, right? That's the point of a decision, is that I'm changing something. And then, at the same time, your brain saying, I don't want anything to change. I want to make a decision, then I want to see if this is better, and then I can choose it. Right? That's not the choice. The choice is always taking a risk, because otherwise it's not evolution. Evolution means that you have no idea what you're entering. You're mutating, which means that you do random stuff and some of it works. And the interesting thing is, as you do that, you become more alive. So the more you kill in you, the more alive you become. Because what you kill will be your resistance, your attachments, your addictions, your definitions, your fear. And every time you kill a small piece of it, you wake up a little more. But it's based on where you have your identity, right? Because as long as we identify with the ego wants horizontal survival because it believes in the kind of product that is, you know, the embodiment of your karma. And then you believe, oh, this is who I am. No, it's a construct of identity basically being the summary of your attachment to the outer manifestations mirroring your karma, and that is who you think you are. So whenever that dies, you think that you are under threat, that you are dying, it's harming you. Well, in the opposite is true. You become more yourself, but the true version. So we need to also work on spiritually placing identity in ourselves as a spiritual being, not in the person, not in the ego, not in the kind of self of the human. And then say, okay, I need to kill this very slowly until there is a separation between the human and my consciousness as presence. Because basically creating that separation so you, even as consciousness, can think freely and discover that I'm driving this car, it's not the car driving me. So we need to feel that risk, because the whole point is to make a decision and then see what happens. If there is no risk, we're not too concerned with what happens, and then we'll learn absolutely nothing. Every decision is an experiment. That's the whole point of it. Most experiments don't work, and that's okay, because we start with an assumption, then we test it out, and we were wrong. But once in a while, we do something that is also random, and all of a sudden it works. That is in harmony with how the world actually works. And then we learn something. But again, when we have created this collective world where nothing really means anything, there is no risk, all of that, we don't pay attention anymore. Because we should, like, I do this, and it should work that way, so that's how it works. We don't learn. We become delusional. So understanding that the only thing that can truly die are your illusions, are your versions, are your different kind of shades of the self. When that happens, you wake up. So making decisions and then try to, what happens now? What is the consequence of this choice? And try to trace it, try to be part of that movement to just see what happens. Hopefully, something will get killed. That's the best thing, because that is how productive change happens, right? If you want a real change in yourself and in the world, something has to die. That already exists, right? So we should not fear it. We should anticipate it and go for the kill, right? And understand that the more we kill, the more we wake up. So it's only the ego that fears. As a spiritual being, you have no such feelings because you already know. What you're trying to figure out is how to unpack yourself, because you don't know that spiritually. You're trying to figure out. And the way to do that is to understand more about how the universe and how existence works. That's how you crack the code. So that's what we're all doing here in all our forms and incarnations. So there's no reason to be afraid, ever, because you can never die, right? So just try to play with it. And yes, if you're not making a decision from you, you might as well not do it, because then you're copying someone else's behavior, and it can help you somewhat, right? Because it's back to, you want to safe it. You want to make sure that it works. It becomes what you want it to, but that's not change. Then it's more of the same. It's a variation of what you already have. So that's the illusion of growth, right? It's just having a different variation of ice cream, right? We are often tricking ourselves into believing that we're growing when we're just creating a different version of what we already have. Right? So we need to have clarity of thought and intention around this and understand what decisions actually are and the purpose. It is to establish change, for something to crack, something to die, so that we may become more alive. And it's actually down to the smallest decisions. When we set the intention of every single decision should make me more awake. It should bring me closer to truth. The only way you can figure that out is by starting within. You cannot look at other people and look at what has worked for them because you have no idea if they actually grow spiritually or if they're just creating more variations of their own karma. You can only see it by starting with you and testing it out and learning from it. So making decisions is extremely important as a spiritual practice, but only when we start from truth within. Anyone else?
We are through our questions for tonight.
Wonderful. I'll just see if I have any more notes because I always do. Yeah, back to the slaves that you keep. We hardly ever want to look at ourselves as manipulators, people who control others, and that we actually want that. But it's part of being human. And when we are in a process of spiritual awakening, this is also something we have to let go of. Remember, as long as you have a need you believe you cannot fulfill yourself, you create the story that I deserve to have someone to give this to me. I'm entitled to. It's the least the world can do for me. And you will try to trap someone and manipulate them into giving you what you think you want or need. This is a great thing about spiritual awakening because when you are, and many of you have experienced this, when you are in deep meditation, you have no needs. When you are in a spiritual flow, it's all gone. You have absolutely no wants or needs. You can think of whatever and it's like, nah. Because that is the true state. That is when you experience yourself being in kind of the full spectrum of what and who you are. So it's very simple. But when we're not doing that job, when we're not working on our own flow, we also call the column. It's basically, we can often see this as a huge column of light. We will create the stories of need and want to compensate for our own lack of presence in ourselves, because it's self-medication. And because the human life form have survived through collaboration and manipulation, it's so easy to fall into that, right? And our dependency and codependencies and all of that, and we justify it. We need to move into self-reliance and self-sufficiency spiritually, emotionally, mentally, not necessarily practically in life because we live in a world, but it's still the intention and being completely responsible for everything all the time. And also making a decision to not manipulate people. Your default setting in your brain is whenever you have a conversation, your brain is trying to figure out how can I manipulate this person? Does this person have something I need and how can I get it? And you're not even aware of it. But we need to become aware of it, and we need to be honest. As long as you have needs, you believe that other people have what you need. Like if you're poor, it's like saying other people have my money. It's a matter of figuring out how I can get them. It's that. When you're rich, You don't think of that because you have your own money. Spiritually, it's the same way. So when you're spiritually poor, you will try to take other people's money because you deserve it. So we manipulate and we control, and we spend a lot of time on that. I have so many people coming to me, being part of this game, and they're not even aware of it. So looking at the human state, the human consciousness, where humans are collectively at this point, and see how much we operate through patterns, how much we're trying to control the world, control other people, because we're not controlling ourselves. We're not disciplined. We're not doing the work. And how we justify our controlling and manipulating behavior. We need to look at it. We need to make decisions. And we need to stick with them, and we need to learn how to practice, how to build our way out of it. Because there is nothing in the current civilization that can help you. It's only going to get worse. You have an opportunity, you have a responsibility to wake up spiritually. That's why you're here in this moment. Because you know spiritually that you have to set yourself free from the collective human and the collective human programmings. And you can do that. So start with the dedication in your heart to yourself as a spiritual being, to your spiritual purpose, to your spiritual journey, and see the rest of the world as simply a rendering, but never let go of the responsibility. Never let go of your freedom. And whenever you feel that you're being pulled into slavery, stop. Whenever you recognize that you are trying to make someone your slave, stop. It's not necessary. You already have everything. Spiritually, everything has already been given. That's a wonderful thing about spiritual awakening, is that you recognize more and more what you already have, what's been given, what's available to you. You don't have to steal it from others. You don't need other people to give you anything. You understand, it's not in the world, that's just the echo. If I have not fully opened myself up to something spiritually, it cannot fully manifest. It will simply be a weaker version meant to self-medicate, meant to keep me going. It will draw me further into my own misery and my own suffering. Everything you could ever want is within. It's in your higher consciousness. It's in you as a spiritual being. And that is what the journey is all about. This is why it's so important that we set ourselves free. Because only then can we access the full potential. Everything you could possibly imagine is already in you. But it's only when you fully let go of the human state that you will discover it. Until then, you're a slave.
Thank you so much, IKYA, for that powerful call to action, and thank you all for joining us tonight for IKYA Live, world news from the spiritual perspective, and your premier news program for spiritual advice for your everyday life. So we are back next Monday, 19 o'clock Oslo time. So be sure to join us and follow us on social media, ikya.official on all the channels. Hop over to our website, ikya.org, and sign up for our newsletter if you haven't done so, to follow along with everything and all the new content and things that are happening. And we look forward to seeing you next Monday at 19 o'clock Oslo time.